Hi, good day everyone. Today we are going to see the second lecture in the subject cryptography and network security. So in this lecture, we are going to cover the topic called as cryptographic attacks. So myself, Dr. Amrithara, I'm working as Associate Professor in the Department of CSE, lecturer at the Baladi College of Engineering. So before going to the cryptographic attacks, so whenever we want to study about any security mechanism or when we need to provide a security to an organization, we need to mainly know about three things. Those are security attacks, security mechanism, and security services. So what does the security attack? So whenever any an action that tries to compromise the data within this organization, we can call it as, or we can consider it as a security attack. Or for example, if you have a data within your system, and if somebody who is not authorized to that access the data from the system, who is compromising, who was trying to compromise data in the system, we can call that thing as a security attack. Whereas security mechanism is that a process that we follow to counter that attack that is being on our organization or on by a system. So security attack is what? Anything or action or a thing, the process which is trying to compromise the data on an organization or a personal system, we can call it a security attack. And the process which we are trying to use to stop that attack or to counter that attack is called as security mechanism. So now coming to security service, by using these security mechanism, we can use either one mechanism or more than two mechanisms, and we can provide these mechanisms as a service to a particular organization in order to safeguard that organization from the security attack. So these are the three things you need to remember if you want to provide an security to an organization. Why? Because if it doesn't know about the attack, then how we are going to know whether which is an attack or which is a normal thing? So first we need to know about the attack. If you know the attack, then for that attack we came to know the perfect countermeasure, and then those things are called as security mechanisms. And by using these security mechanisms, so we can provide services to the organization. So now we'll see the first part, that is security attacks. We're going to see what are the different types of attacks we are going to have, and that we'll see one by one now. So coming to this security attacks, we can consider these security attacks on mainly three security goals. The main three security goals are confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So confidentiality says that whatever the information that is being communicated between two parties, sender and receiver, the data should be confidential. It is not revealed to anyone except the sender or except to the receiver. That's what the confidentiality says. So if any attack is there on that confidentiality, we can call it as threat to the confidential. Similarly, the threat to integrity. The integrity says whatever the data that is being transferred or being maintained in the system or transferred between sender and receiver, that it should be modified or changed in an authorized manner only. That is, for example, in my system, I am only the person authorized to change the data. If somebody else who doesn't know the password of my system, if he is trying to change my data, that is some attack on the integrity. Similarly, availability. In the last lecture, we have seen availability is also most very important principle of security. Why? Because the data that is being transferred or the data being stored in a database should be available to an authorized or legitimate user. So legitimate user, whenever he wants to access the data, it should be available. So if the data is not available to an authorized person, we can consider it as attack on the or threat on to availability. Now we'll see the first one, that is threat to confidentiality. If we consider the threat to confidentiality attack, the first one is snooping. So snooping refers to unauthorized access or interception of data. For example, if we consider there are two entities, A and B. Consider two entities. There are two entities, A and B, who are trying to communicate over a network. Now, the data that is being transferred between A and B, it is only should be visible or understandable to A and B only. It is only should be visible and understandable to A and B only. If there is a person called as C, let us consider C as an intruder. Now, if he wants to intercept this data, he wants to intercept their communication, he wants to know about the data, then we can call this or consider this attack as snooping attack. Snooping attack, that is the attack that is being placed on the confidentiality. So as you know that the confidentiality principle says whenever the data is being communicated between two entities, it should be confidential and it should be known only to either sender or receiver. So we can call this as snooping. See here, he doesn't modify the data or he doesn't do anything with it, just he want to know about the data. So if he modifies the data, then that will be a different attack. That will be attack on the integrity. But now here he just want to know the data. So this attack is called as our snooping, and this is attack on confidentiality. Now let us go for the next one, that is traffic analysis. Traffic analysis. Here he doesn't know what is happening, but what does C will do is he'll sit for some amount of time. He'll sit for some amount of time. For example, he spend an half an hour amount of time on studying the traffic, that is, or traffic in the sense studying the messages that are being transferred between A and B, right? He'll sit for half an hour and he will study what are the messages that are being transferred between A and B. From these messages which he has collected from the past half an hour, he will do some analysis on these messages. He will do some analysis on these messages, and now he will find out what they are communicating. Here in this scenario, the one way to be safe from the snooping attack is we'll use encipherment. Encipherment in this encryption. So the normal data will be encrypted in from unreadable format. He doesn't know that format. Even if he knows, he doesn't know the meaning of that words, right? That is one way to counter the snooping attack. But if you counter this snooping attack, now what he will do is he will keep track of all the messages which are being transferred between this A and B. Now he will do some analysis on this data. He will do some analysis on the data and he'll find out what they are communicating. So these two attacks are the things that can be imposed on the confidentiality. So okay, now we are going to see the attacks that can be composed or that can be done on the integrity, okay. Now, so the first attack that can be done on the integrity is modification, right? I told you, if they are going to study same, well, let us consider the same two entities A and B. Let us consider the two entities A and B. Now they are communicating. There is data transfer between A and B. Now actually this data should be confidential. So if there is a snooping attack, the attacker who just only knows about the data, he will not do anything. Now in the integrity, if he wants to have a modification attack, now what he will do is, now he will read this data. And he'll modify the data before it reaches to B. He will modify the data. For example, A sends to B data is that tomorrow we don't have any meeting. For example, tomorrow there is no meeting. Now, simply what C will do, simply he will remove no from the communication. Remove no from the communication. Now what happens to the message? It will be tomorrow we have meeting. So what happened? The data that is being transferred between A and B, it is modified. So this is one attack that can be imposed on the integrity. Now we'll see the next attack, that is masquerading. We can call it as masquerade attack. So it is like spoofing. So instead of, for example, there is a communication between A and B. There should be a communication between A and B. But A has not started any message to B. Now here comes our attacker C. What he will do is he will pretend to be A. And he'll send some data to B. Now what does B feels that? B feels that the data is received from A. But actually the data is received from C. So masquerade or spoofing happens when the attacker impersonates somebody else. Here the attacker C is impersonating A. Now this is also attack on the integrity. Now the third one is replay. The third one is replay attack. What does the replay attack will do is, for example, consider A and B again. Consider A and B again. Here A is a bank customer. A is a bank customer and B is considered B as a bank. Consider B as a bank. Now there is an attacker in the middle. Now what happens? A sends a message to B bank saying that deduct amount of 100 and credit to D. Deduct an amount of 100 and credit that amount to D. Now it is okay. Now what happens? The attacker simply copies this message. The attacker simply copy this message. After some amount of time, again he replaces this message. Again he replaces this message. Now what happens? Actually A has sent to the bank request to deduct an amount of 100 only one time. But what happens? The attacker again replace this attack. For example, if we replace the attacks for 3 times, what happens? Unknowingly the bank will deduct 300 from the account of A and he will add the amount of 300 to D. Amount of 300 to D. Now what happening here? Actually the message is not sent by A, but the same message is copied by C and is replaying the attack to the bank. So this is attack on integrity. The last one is what? Reputation. This is very important thing you need to remember. So reputation is that, for example, there is an communication between A and B. There is an communication between A and B. Now the problem comes here. The reputation or non-reputation, no reputation or non-reputation comes here. Whenever that the communication entities denies that the message is not sent by them, or the other communication entity denies that he has not received the message even though he have received the message. So for example, say A sent message that we have meeting at 10:30. Consider we have meeting at 10:30 a.m. We have meeting at 10:30 a.m. Now B arrives to the meeting hall and the A has not arrived to the meeting. Now A says that I have not sent you the message. So this is the problem. This is the problem in the reputation. No, so we can stop this one by using the non-reputation. Or else the second part is, for example, B receives the message. He sees that there is a meeting at 10:30. There is a meeting at 10:30. Now what does B says that no, I have not received the message, I have not seen the message. Now what happens? So this is the attack on the integrity. This is the attack on the integrity. So these 4 are the attacks that are placed on the integrity. What are those? Modification, masquerade, replay, and reputation. Now we will see attack on the availability. So remember, the attack on confidentiality, we have 2 attacks. That are these: snooping and traffic analysis. We have 2 attacks on, so we have 4 attacks on integrity. Those are modification, masquerade, replay, and reputation. We have only 1 attack on the availability, that is denial of service. That is what? Denial of service. So denial of service. So if you want to know about what is denial of service, generally we need to know about client server architecture. So we need to know about client server architecture. So consider there is a client. So there will be a server. So I'm repeating server as S. So consider this is the server. So this is a system. We can consider client as a system, right? We can consider client as a system. So what happens whenever, for example, consider whenever you search something on the Google. You search something on the Google, simply we place something on the web page. So simply we place on the search button in the web browser. So whenever something is placed on the web browser and we press enter, that request will be submitted to the server. So server gives response to the request. So we can call this as request, and whatever we are getting from the server, we can call it as response. We call it as what? response. So this is normal thing what happens here. Now what happens in the denial of service is, in the denial of service there will be more attacks. So for example, if you consider there is an attacker system, there is an attacker system, what he will do is he will have some flood of requests to the server. He will have some flood of requests to the server. Now what happens, there is some capacity to the server. The server can handle certain amount of requests at a point of time only. Okay, certain number of, for example, consider it is going to handle only 100 requests. What happens, he'll see around some 1000 number of requests at a time. He'll send 1000 number of requests at a time. Now what happens, actually this is not an legitimate user. He is some attacker who is flooding some request to the server. Now what happens, he is a legitimate client. Now he wants to get the request and response. Now what happens, as the server is more busy by attending these requests, now this server will be unavailable. This server will be unavailable to the client. The server will be unavailable to the client. So what happens, the service of the server to the client is denied. The service of the server to the client is denied. So we call this attack as what? Denial of service, which is an attack on the availability. I told you, no, due to the large number of requests from this attacker client, the server will be on full busy for serving this request. It will become unavailable to the other clients, legitimate clients. So this is an attack on availability. So this is one attack. Nowadays, recently we are also seeing new types of attacks called as DDoS, right? Distributed denial of service attacks. So this is quite different from DDoS. It's quite different from DDoS. So I told you, in DDoS we'll use only one system. So from all the requests will be only from that one single system, only from the single system to the server. But in distributed denial of service, what they will do is the attacker first grabs some computing device like mobiles or tabs or some systems. Now there will be an attacker. Now he will grab this, he will get access of these systems, and there will be a single server. There will be a single server. Now by using these systems, we can call them as botnets or zombie systems. We can call them as botnets. So by using these botnets, he'll keep on sending the request. He will keep on sending the request. Now it is somewhat difficult when compared with the previous DOS attack, where they are using only one thing and we are sending number of requests. So when you have more number of requests from a single system, we can consider it as a DOS attack and we'll stop responding to that request. But whereas this DDO, that is distributed DOS, here what happens is he first get access to many number of other things that is called, we can consider mobiles or tabs or computers. Now from those things he'll keep on sending the request. As we are receiving requests from more number of systems, the server will be unavailable to the actual client. The server will be unavailable to the actual client. So this is another attack on the available, that is distributed DOS. That is now nowadays this is more famous. So up to now what we have seen that the main things that we are going to provide in security are confidentiality, integrity and availability. Now we have seen the attacks on these three things. So we have seen 2 attacks on confidential, snooping and traffic analysis. We have seen 4 attacks on integrity. Those are modification or masquerading or spoofing, replaying and repudiation. And we have seen 1 attack and 2 attacks on availability. Those are denial of service. The other thing, the new variant of denial of service is distributed denial of service. Now we have seen on the aspect of these things, confidentiality, availability and integrity. Now based upon the nature of the attacks, we can divide those attacks as passive attacks and active attacks. So what is the nature? So if they are not modifying the data, we can call them as passive attacks. If they are doing any modification, we can call them as active attacks. So the attacks on the information can be classified into 2 types. Those are passive attacks and active attacks. In the passive attack thing, the attacker will not modify the data. Simply he will observe the data. Whereas in active attacks, here the attacker will modify the data.